Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Jaqueline Morris, and I'm the moderator for this panel, which is Imperatives and Contemporary Approaches for Effective Management or Regulation of Social Media. It's a kind of long and hefty title, and it's something that is also a hefty and hot topic right now, because we've heard a lot in the past few years about issues with content on the internet, especially social media content. We've had the Mueller, everybody said the Mueller report, 2016, Russian interference in the US elections done via social media, social media being used to fund sectarian violence in Sri Lanka and India, fake stories being planted and causing great harm to people and companies, the spread of anti-vaccine propaganda, the rise of nationalism, private information being exposed to the public and to bad actors and so on. And everyone seems, from the media and so forth, it seems like everything's wrong with the world is the fault of social media. Just this morning, I was reading an article in the news about the need for added regulation with regard to privacy of information on social media platforms. Calls are being made for regulation. Hearings are being held. We've seen Facebook and Google, who are here, and many others up in front of the US Congress. We've had hearings in England. We've seen those as well. And the question that we have here is, it's about the content. Can internet content be regulated? Should it be regulated? And if so, by whom? To what extent? So our panel, we have to my left, Shernon Osepa from the Internet Society, then Gabriel Recalde from Google, and Claudia Giraldo from Facebook. Welcome. Come in. And they will bring their expertise and perspectives to the discussion. So we'll start with Shernon from the Internet Society. Thanks.
Thank you, Jacqueline. I think talking about this topic, imperatives and contemporary approaches for effective management of regulation of social media, we need to break it down and start asking ourselves, what is the objective or why social media created? If you just take a look at, let's say, the definition of social media, we can say that we are focusing on, let's say, websites and applications that in one way or the other enable users to create and share content or to participate in social networking. So I think it's very important that we don't penalize, let's say, social media, but to focus on, let's say, the behavior of those who are using, let's say, social media, or with respect to what they're doing on social media. It's the same if you compare it with a knife, for example. A knife is just a neutral thing. It can be used for good or it can be used for bad. So I think that's a point of departure that we should use when talking about social media. But okay, that was more or less the theoretical part. So let's go now to reality. And we can see that social media regulation is everywhere these days. There are discussions everywhere regarding social media. And not only, let's say, on the lowest level of community, but let's say on the highest level, especially ministers and other global leaders are focusing on this topic. For example, the G7 interior ministers, they just had a declaration in which they are, let me see how to say it. They call for companies to add upload filtering infrastructure to prevent terrorist content. So this is something going on right now with the, let's say, G7 interior ministers. If we take a look at Europe, for example, same thing going on. We see that the European Parliament passed a copyright directive that will require, let's say, platforms to use upload filters to filter out copyrighted content. So that's the European, what we're seeing is taking place in Europe. So, and another very important detail based on what happened in New Zealand a couple of weeks ago, we are seeing also that the New Zealand government is pushing hard for regulation of social media. So it's something that we cannot avoid, because we will continue to see, especially government and other policymakers, focusing on this topic. And not to forget, let's say, all the fake news going on, of which mostly politicians are a victim of. So, of course, given that they are most of the time victims of these fake news things, they will be focusing or trying to find a way how they can address those challenges. So again, we see governments and other policymakers are pushing hard with respect to how to regulate social media. If I take a look, for example, at Internet Society's position, we believe everything that we do, we are focusing on an open, globally connected, trustworthy, and secure internet for everyone. So what we're trying to do, especially when it comes to, let's say policy discussions, we are trying to see what are the implications for the internet that we are using nowadays. And if you look at the structure of the internet, it has a so-called, let's say, invariants. So these are principles that don't change, and they have, let's say, passed the test of time. So they are principles. Maybe you can have a detail slightly that can change, but the principle will remain. And I will just mention a few of them. For example, global reach and integrity. If you look how the internet functions, it's based on end-to-end connectivity. So we don't want people to be, I'm sure if that's the right word, messing around in between. It should remain end-to-end connectivity. If you look at the general purpose, the internet is capable of supporting all kind of services. So that's the second, let's say, invariant that we're focusing on. A third one would be it supports innovation without requiring permission. Just imagine back then, Facebook, yes, I have that here on the table. Mark Zuckerberg had to ask permission. I have this Facebook thing. What do you guys regulators think? You know. So if you look at the model of the internet, it supports innovation without asking any permission. So any one of us can do and innovate if you would like to do that. It's accessible. So another very important part is you can get onto it. So you don't need to, again, ask people permission to get the internet and help building it. So these are another, what we call invariant. Another one is based on interoperability and mutual agreement. Internet is all about internet working. So you need to have, let's say, standards that understand what others are doing in order for us to keep all these networks up and running. And another one invariant is collaboration. The internet is what it is nowadays based on collaboration. And we are also seeing this whole collaboration spirit going on within, let's say, internet pioneers and others as well nowadays. And I think the last one would be the technology itself. We are seeing reusable building blocks. And something that is very important when it comes to the internet, you don't have permanent favorites. You know? Something that maybe a few years would work, nowadays would not be applicable. If I ask, for example, whom of you still remember Alta Vista? I mean, it's gone. And we have here our friends here now replacing them, you know? So I'm not saying that someone else will replace you in the future, but just, you never know, okay? But this is the way how the internet functions. So it has some invariants. These are key principles that we need to defend in one way or the other. We are not defending technology, but we are defending, let's say, the building blocks that can help us move on and to have a much better internet. So I think maybe later on I give a bit more details, but from what we are doing at Internet Society, whenever there is a discussion going on, we are looking, okay, what would be the implications of those discussions with respect to especially to those invariants that I did mention.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry. Yeah. Thank you very much, Shernon. That summary of the underlying principles of the internet and the ones that we must keep secret and inviolate is very interesting. Now we move on to Gabriel.
Again, I would like to take a slightly different approach from the one that is suggested in the title of the panel. Because I think that maybe like focusing on social media could lead us to a very limited vision of the issues that are at stake when speaking about the challenges of the internet nowadays. So I will speak instead of internet intermediaries, understanding them as those who facilitate the access and use of the internet by users, and as a medium through which users can create and access to content. And in this regard, social media is only one of the many intermediaries that exist today. So we have search engines, we have blogs, we have hosting providers, we have ISPs, e-commerce platforms, payment platforms, and many, many more. Those are the ones that enable users to generate and access content online. And I think it's important to make this remark to have a holistic approach of the issues, right? As even though each type of intermediary has a different role and function, we need to pay attention, and we need to keep this distinction in mind to pay attention to the impact that one regulation that is aimed at one intermediary could have on the broader ecosystem, right, and the rest of the players. So one of the commonalities that all internet intermediaries have in common is that they have provided unparalleled access to culture, to content, to news, entertainment, educational materials, and information in general, right? And have enhanced economic growth and innovation all across the world, thanks to lowering barriers and reducing costs to starting and operating small business. And they also have facilitated user empowerment and choice by providing them the opportunity to access to a vast amount of information. And for all of this to be possible, intermediaries have always relied on the principle of free flow of information, which many times comes with challenges, which are old, some are new, some change, some died, and then some resurface, but we always have challenges, right? Especially to what is known, like we can single all them out into one concept of controversial content, which includes, for example, child sexual abuse, images or materials, incitement to violence, misinformation, revenge porn, and many of the issues that Shernon already mentioned. So for this reason, that doesn't mean that the free flow of information implies that anything goes on the internet, as there have always been legitimate limits to it, like all from the very start of the internet. And laws that regulate illegal speech apply to online platforms as well. And dealing with these issues responsibly and striking the right balance is a critical and challenging part of the role that intermediaries play in society. And I want to strike this idea of right balance because I think that's the hardest but the most important idea when dealing with how to manage controversial content online. There's no one fit solution for all types of content or for all types of mediums. So, for example, while it might be easier, when I say that all controversial content is not the same, let's think about, for example, child sexual abuse images, where there's almost like a universal consensus that that's something wrong, that it's easy to identify. This is something that all players need to act to avoid it, to prevent it, and to penalize it, right? But that might not be the same for other types of illegal content. example, in which cultural nuances and the context play an important role. For example, content that might be considered in one context to encourage violence might not be the same or appropriate when it is featured as part of a news report. And Google takes that responsibility very seriously, and we put a lot of effort in counteracting controversial content all across our services. We have developed content policies that put the lines, draw the lines between what is allowed and what content is allowed and what content is not allowed in our platforms, including prohibition on terrorist recruitment, hate speech, incitement to violence. And whenever we are flagged about any of this content in any of our services, we take a careful review and take it down if it's in violation of our policies. Then we also use a mix of human capacity and technology to detect and detect this type of content and enforce our policies. And this is important because technology cannot understand context while humans can. But technology provides us also a way to reach scale. To reach scale, which is important nowadays. So one example is we use hash technology, for example, for images that depict children in some sort of abuse or sexual, in which we put like a digital footprint on images. So whenever that any image is re-uploaded in any of our services, that is detected automatically and removed automatically. But we also think that platforms can also play like a positive role in counterbalancing most of the illegal content. So we have developed programs in which we involve, for example, in YouTube, we involve YouTube creators in playing a positive role and using the same platform that is maybe used for wrong, that use it for good, and working on using them as positive role models for example, fighting xenophobia, hate speech, extremism. We also collaborate with other industry players, especially with governments as well. For example, in YouTube, we have developed the YouTube Trusted Flagger programs, in which we involve individual government agencies, NGOs, that are effective at notifying YouTube content that could violate our policies. So whenever these institutions have the tools to detect and flag that content, that is reviewed faster than if a common user would do it. And we have been, for example, in the Caribbean, we have been engaging with the Broadcasting Commission to include them in this program as well. So this is what companies do, or what intermediaries do. What do we think that governments can do to, again, help strike this balance in these issues? First is developing safe harbors for internet intermediaries, and we can discuss this maybe later. But this is basically the idea that online platforms should not be held liable for content that is generated by its users under certain conditions. And this has been the legal framework that has helped provide the legal certainty for internet companies to grow and to strike the balance on the content that is illegal. So in the model of this is the judiciary, the judicial body, and not platforms or not administrative bodies or private parties, who should be defining which content should or should not stay online. Because online platforms are not in the position to judge, in many cases, the illegality of a content or not. So if you force platforms, if you force a private actor to guess if a content is illegal or not, then they will probably take it down ahead of the face of ahead of the chance of being penalized for not being. So you are in some way providing incentives for private censorship. So in the same way, we should also proceed with caution, with giving the power to administrative authorities that are looking to determine what should and should not be available online, because it also opens a door for censorship. So as many international bodies as the OAS and the UN have always pushed in favor of being the judicial body who should be in charge of defining what is and what is not illegal online. So safe harbors protect freedom of expression and innovation, striking the right balance. And I think I bring this idea back because I think it's the most important concept around this issue, and the aim that we should follow. And then the second idea that governments can work is about digital literacy. And I think that is fundamental in today's society, helping new users to navigate the challenges that they can face online. And it's not only about protecting their own data and knowing the tools to protect their privacy, but also to identify and avoiding misinformation and have a positive role online. So that's all for me. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And now we go on to Claudia.
Thank you. My co-panelists have been so articulate that I'll try my best not to repeat many of the things they've said so far. I couldn't agree more with the fact that this is not a debate exclusively about social media, but that the issues that we discuss here affect the internet as a whole. I think it's no secret to anybody here that our founder and CEO, Mark Zuckerberg, has been very vocal as to our intention to cooperate with authorities, with experts, with as many stakeholders as we can to explore how we can address nowadays the societal issues around the internet. And also to determine, how and where regulation can actually help. It is, I guess the tricky part here is how to get it right. And in order to get it right, he phrased it in a very nice way. And it was that we can take this as an opportunity to learn from each other and to collaborate, to make sure that we work together and determine amongst all of us what we think smart regulation might look like. Because at the end of the day, it is, as Gabriel very well said it is about a balance, right? It's trying to balancing the different rights, openness versus privacy, freedom of expression versus security, and trying to preserve the best of the internet while at the same time protecting people from harm. We don't want to lose what we've achieved so far in terms of the great impact of the internet. The internet has great impact on education, on health, on disaster relief, even on public officials communicating with citizens. And I've had the pleasure of speaking about that with some of you actually. But most importantly, on innovation and productivity. I had the pleasure this morning of opening an event that we have here in the same floor, where we're training 500 small companies on how to use the internet and how to leverage their platform to sell more and to grow. I guess at the end of the day, this is the beginning of a conversation, of a very exciting conversation. But it's important not to lose track of the overall goal that we want all to achieve. The focus of our company has shifted in the past 2 years. We realize that we have a major responsibility on managing this in an appropriate, smart way. And we count on all of you to have that conversation, because as Gabriel said, the basis that we set now, updating the rules of the internet, is not only going to affect us, it's going to affect everybody. And I don't think it's right. It shouldn't be one company trying to determine that. It should be a multi-party effort. So I don't want to go into the details. We've done so much in the past 2 years, but we are committed to working on many issues that we think are important. And there's so many angles to this, but we started focusing on some of those, particularly harmful content, privacy. But I wish we had all the answers. The reality is we don't. This is part of a conversation, and it should be a conversation that doesn't undermine the benefits of what the internet can bring to us in the future.
Thank you, Claudia. Now, one of the questions that came up, when you are developing your standards, your community standards, the regulations to say, okay, this is content that is that needs to come down. How do you manage to do that on a global scale when we have so many different cultures? So, for example, in a Muslim country, a woman in a swimsuit. And that means basically your Sports Illustrated is not content that would be able to go in that area. What do you do to manage that and make that work for the globe?
Yeah, it's a very complex task, to put it lightly. As you well say, when you gather 2 billion people, what is highly offensive in the Middle East is extremely conservative and could even be considered as censorship in Finland, right? So at the end of the day, what you want is to get the principles as right as you can. And that is not a task that we do on our own. So on a continuous basis, we speak to experts around the world to help us determine which should be those guidelines that we should follow. And then we do a combination, a little bit of what Gabriel was explaining for Google. We do a combination of, we're a technology company, using technology, but also using human beings. Why? Because, and a very clear example of this could be nudity, for example, right? We can train the machines to learn and spot nudity. However, they're borderline content that is not necessarily nudity, that is just suggestive, or is a piece of art as opposed to a vulgar display of. So there are many nuances, and because there are many nuances, we have human beings that moderate as well. So we have increased the amount of people that we have around the world. We have around 30,000 people in 10 different offices, 6 cities around the world, who are constantly looking at content for those cases that are not black and white, right? And trying to enforce the rules that we have set for our platform, which are the community standards. Having said that, it shouldn't be left just to us to determine what's acceptable or not acceptable. And that's why it's very important to start this conversation to see how we can evolve in that aspect, and at the same time we can help ourselves accountable on that. But it is actually just an anecdote. Last year there was a meeting in Brussels, right, around privacy, and we brought an exercise where we took just 5 of the cases that we had in the platform of content that could be considered harmful. And we sat experts from around the world in small groups to determine if the content should be removed or not. And it was very interesting to see how it became a very long conversation. Many of them weren't quite, right. They didn't know if they should remove it or not. And the reality is we have sometimes seconds to take that decision, right? Facebook takes down 2 million posts per day. So, there are certain guidelines that I think we should build together, and I think that would be very healthy for the future of the internet.
I mean, yes, I agree with Claudia. It's like, I think it's one of the most challenging tasks for global internet companies like us, right? So for Google, we need to distinguish between 2 types of services. So once you have Google Search, which is not like a content hosting platforms, but more of an index and a map of what the internet is like. So our approach there is to always like link to as much information as possible. Doesn't mean that because it's what exists there, right? It's what's accessible for users. It doesn't mean that we also comply with some general guidelines on compliance of law of what content could or can or cannot be available at the index. For example, copyright, child sexual abuse, and many others. Then we also design our services to be served locally in many countries. So we have local versions of YouTube, local versions of Google Search. And in those cases, we always have processes for complying with local laws in terms of what is accessible or no. So we have forms available for legal authorities to request the takedown of content that is in violation of a specific law. For example, in Germany or in France, there's a prohibition of Nazi content, right? So we make sure that we comply with. So that's another way of dealing with these cultural differences in different countries.
Yes, I think this is exactly what we are trying to, let's say, to avoid, because initially, remember when I started my whole discussion, I did mention, let's say, the ministers, G7 ministers. We didn't focus much on it, but what they said basically was more, they would like to focus a lot on filtering. So their focus has been on filtering. And this is a challenge, especially for, let's say, for these kinds of organizations, because of course they have a lot of funds. At least that's what we believe. But even these big organizations, they don't have, let's say, enough people to be working, let's say, 24 hours a day, try to solve all these content filters challenges. So you need a lot of artificial, let's say, intelligence and all kinds of technology trying to filter, let's say, illegal or whatever content. And at the end of the day, what we have seen, some of these, let's say, search engines, they have filtered, let's say, legitimate content. Because while maybe you just see a word, for example, bomb or something like that, but it doesn't have any connotation with terrorists trying to get information how to build a bomb. Maybe it's just something else, referring to completely something else. But this filter, when it sees that particular word, it will just filter it out. And maybe it was a legitimate, let's say, content on the internet. So this is one of the challenges that we're facing. And what we are focusing at the internet society, as I did mention, is more the integrity of the internet. And we are reaching out to especially government and other policymakers, trying to educate them in order for them to take sound decisions.
One of the things that you mentioned was, well, Claudia, that you were using people from different parts of the world. How big is diversity with regard to actually having making good decisions about what content to remove? Because it's not just about laws. Obviously, it's about social terms and mores and so forth. So I do recall there was a time when there was some issue going on in Sri Lanka, and Facebook made a great effort to try and get people native to that area. But how do we manage to develop that sort of resource in those areas so that they are there for you to be able to hire them?
Diversity is crucial to get this right. And the reason why it's crucial is because, again, there are many nuances. Sometimes even slang that is used that is used in a particular country, that if you're not familiar with that, you wouldn't even know that that's derogatory, for example, right? So, so we've done a great effort, and that's why we have these offices in different places to get people who speak different languages, who can hopefully spot those nuances. But also we have done a great effort in improving the product itself. so that people can report in an easier way when they think a content should not be there. So we do what we can, and we're very focused on doing it right and doing as much as we can. But even that combination of artificial intelligence and the 30,000 people doesn't guarantee 100% of the times that we're going to get it right. So we want to empower our users every time to help us in that task as well. If there's something that we miss, that they can report it in the platform itself. If there's a decision that they disagree with, we're in the process of evaluating a group or an external group where they could appeal those decisions, right? Also, because there are many things that, quite frankly, there shouldn't be left to us, right? It's very difficult for me at times, the platform, to determine what political content is, right? It shouldn't be a platform determining if it is political content. So it is critical to have diversity, and a way to have diversity is empowering the community as well to help them.
Thank you. Anyone else have a comment on that? Or?
No, just maybe to add to Claudia that diversity is not only crucial to this particular issue that we are discussing, but also like in all the activities that a company like Google or Facebook does. So it's like in terms of like product development, like management, like business. Google puts a lot of effort in making sure that all voices are heard and all minorities are represented. And I think that's also one of the biggest challenges that we still have, because it's like in terms of gender, for example, representation at the higher level. So it's a key component of the whole operations of a company like Google.
Cool. We want to start moving it towards what can we recommend to people, the regulators and governments, officials and so forth, who are in the room and listening. What sort of idea do you think would work to have a collaborative regulatory framework between the intermediary companies and the governments? For example, I was reading the other day that there might be a suggestion for Facebook with regard to privacy, to have a community board that would allow that would have oversight and would allow appeals and so forth to that. And then, of course, there's also the fining of companies. What do you think about that? Or are there other ideas, other forms that you think might be useful to suggest, rather than the straight regulatory heavy hand of the government?
Yeah, I guess that's why I chose those words for my introduction. I think it is really the beginning of the conversation, because it's important to decide as a community what we want and where we want to go. And based on that, to create good communication so that we truly understand the issue, right? And what it's at stake. And everybody can put their best foot forward and arrive to that solution. The reality is not very clear at this point what the solution is, because it should be a result of a process that is just starting, right? What is important, I think, is that in the process of starting that conversation, we're very we need to be diligent, and we need, to a certain extent, to agree, at least on principles, because what it's at stake as well is the future of the internet. Is that our developers can grow new businesses, that there's interoperability. So what I think is really tricky right now is that this is, and for very valid reasons, right, a source of concern that many governments have, but they're all addressing them in a very disconnected way. And addressing this in a disconnected way can be very risky because then it can undermine the possibility for growth locally. So I think the real challenge and the best response I could give you at this point is we need to create mechanisms to get that conversation going.
Yeah, and also, like I know that governments have like this impetus, to regulate. So whenever there's a problem, the solution is, okay, let's put a regulation forward. Maybe regulation is not always the solution. And it's also not a discussion of no regulation or a lot of regulation. It's about a discussion about smart regulation, like what type of regulation is necessary for addressing the challenges that we're facing, but without taking away from us the good thing about the internet, right? Just to put it into Shernon's words. So I think there are many other ways that companies and governments can think of working together. And I mentioned just a couple of one, like go in terms of like specific programs and solutions that internet companies make available, like the YouTube Trusted Flagger program, but also thinking about together what are the local needs and the best ways and mechanisms to address them. And I'm thinking about like education, right? And this is something that we at Google put a lot of investment in as well. Like thinking with local authorities, developing digital literacy programs to educate the populations and the users on how to protect themselves against these harms. And I think that's a very important concept and programs that could address most of the challenges more effectively than regulation per se.
And that's something that Internet Society works with a lot, right? The education of end users.
Yes, and I think we should be focusing on how to attack, let's say, the issue at the source. The first thing that you need to ask yourself, the problem that I'm trying to solve with this particular measure, will I solve that problem? And if the answer is no, then you need to look for other alternatives. So this is one of the challenges that we have been facing. If you look, I did mention, for example, filtering. You can compare it with blocking as well. There are a few ways how people can block content. I'm not going to highlight all of them now, but technically there are a few. You can say, okay, IP and protocol-based blocking, deep packet inspection, URL-based blocking, platform-based blocking, DNS-based blocking. So sometimes you're focusing on one particular technology. You think you will be solving this problem, but in reality, you'll make it maybe even bigger. So just focus on the problem that I would like to solve, come with an exact measure to get that problem solved.
Great, thank you. Now, does anybody have lots of questions? Okay, let's start with Kevin. And then
thank you very much, Jaqueline. Thank you to the panelists for that very wonderful, intriguing dialogue. I wanted to piggyback on that last round of interventions and challenge the panel and even the audience here to change the narrative somewhat. Instead of talking about regulation, or as we say here, effective management or regulation, why can't we speak more so about enhanced governance? And I'm saying enhanced governance because these are just my reflections and observations of us here in the Caribbean region. We say regulation, but we tend to have a heavy-handed approach to creating sanction-type laws, which happens in one area, yet in another room, there's a strategy and a document that speaks to enabling legislation, and there seems to be a disconnect between the two. Also in the Caribbean, we have a penchant for disregarding authority when it comes to rules that we think may not be appropriate or suitable. And I think A testament to that would be how much we enjoy Carnival in the Caribbean. And despite all of that, I think there continues to be, when situations arise on digitally mediated platforms, there continues to be a certain level of antagonism that occurs among groups. And I think what Claudia and Gabriel and Shernon are alluding to is that there needs to be more communication and more awareness among the groups. So I just want to make that challenge. Maybe we need to understand that there are different governance mechanisms. We should talk more about community rules. We should talk more about the role of private ordering that already Google and Facebook and other intermediaries are doing. We should talk more about codes of conduct. And probably as a recommendation to state actors, we should really look at clearing up pathways for advocacy. So who are the policy authorities involved? If I have an issue that affects me in my personal life on social media, where do I address that issue? So that's just a challenge I'm putting out there, to change the narrative. Let us here in the Caribbean not speak about effective management and regulation, but focus on enhanced governance. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I comment on that, Kevin? Yes, I think I was sitting just next to you, right? So I think maybe you saw my notes. because I have it here. Instead, this was one of my last, let's say, comments I'd like to give, leave with the audience. Instead of trying to defend society from the internet, a technology that benefits all humanity and close off its potential in an attempt to stop terrorists, government should use the internet to build community strength and resilience, to empower citizens to protect their communications and to promote solidarity. We should not let terrorists sway how we use the internet. So that would have been my last comments, and it's just in harmony with what you are suggesting.
Nigel?
Yes, Nigel Casimir, CTU. I guess taking up from where Kevin left off, we heard about the challenge of the companies themselves trying to manage content, and Finland being different from the Middle East, for example. I wanted to be clear and try to apply that to the Caribbean situation. I want to be clear in terms of what method do you use to decide whether to serve particular content in Finland that you might not serve in the Middle East, you know, and how granular is that done? Is it that we have a per country sort of filter or partner that you have that helps you do that? And if that is the case, you know, how could you bring that down to the level of per country on a small island basis? And do you have any practical or adequate effective measure that could apply to like small islands in the Caribbean related to that? Or is it that we just get lumped in, like, for example, with the rest of Latin America, as often is done with Latin America and the Caribbean? Right?
It's really not that tailored. That's the reality. And I guess one of the main challenges of global companies is virtually impossible to adapt them to every single country that we cover. So what do we have to do? We have to agree on minimal principles that we think we should not, you know, support, right? And that's why what we did was create the community standards. And the community standards are basically tell you what you can and cannot do on Facebook, but bring them to the minimum standard, right? That we should uphold, not to offend anybody or open opportunities for crime, or, you know, and then we use the human beings around the world to look at the nuances where those community standards are not that black or white, And we get things wrong. I mean, sometimes the example that I gave you about art, right? There's a very famous painting of a nude woman, and our artificial intelligence tools might take it down. So very likely we're going to hear from people in that country saying, hey, what happened here? And so that's why it's a combination of tools. And we make sure that we involve experts on that matter from around the world when we determine those community standards. Because it shouldn't be up to us to decide what's harmful or not. And the nuances go, for example, when you're speaking about violent content, right? If it's an individual user that just uploads something that is very offensive, of course we should take it down, or that could lead to even harm in the offline world, right? But we cannot censor press. So if there's an equally difficult image, but that comes from a reputed media company, we would be very wrong on taking it down. So the company leans towards freedom of expression more than anything else, because we still believe that it's very important to give everybody a voice. And then what we do is try to create checks and balances around that, and to create tools within the platform and in-house groups to make sure that we look at those cases that are not black and white. But we don't really tailor it for specific regions or countries.
Carlton Samuels. So I may be the outlier in the room. I worry about a few things. My father told me many years ago that if a man have more than 3 or 4 principles that are inviolable, you have too many. And I am a freedom of speech. I worry about anybody interfering in my right to read what I wish to read. I worry about having access to information. Sometimes I don't know what I don't know unless I see it. And to the extent that someone else would deny me the right to see it bothers me. So while I subscribe to this idea of minimal set of principles that we can work with, because I want to reserve the right to be offended. I really believe that that right belongs to me. And I would not wish to cede that right to any man, to any group. And that's the thing that bothers me about the stock. Kevin says that we like have punitive laws in the Caribbean. The thing that I worry about is not the law, but is the actors around the law, because we have a lot of laws that are punitive now. They just don't ever get enforced. I mean, for example, one I know very well is regulations around the region. You have lots of regulations with very punitive penalties. Well, we just don't have an enforcement mechanism around it. And everybody's happy with that. I mean, usually. So my take on all of this is that at the top end, I would wish not to have a set of laws on the books that somebody coming down the road afterwards have access to and then begins to exploit. And in my view, irritate my right to be offended. It's very important to me that I remain an individual with the right to be offended. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Carlton, for your intervention. I couldn't agree more. And maybe to explain a little better what we're referring to, is we're referring to things that to a certain extent are black and white to be wrong, right? We're not going to leave child exploitation images online, not because they could be offensive, but because they have all sorts of connotations. Exactly. So there are some that come from commonalities in the law around the world of things that we all know are bad, right, and shouldn't be allowed.
All right, I'll take on the point he was mentioning about his mother. Oh, it was your father. Oh, okay. All right, mother thing will come in. When you look at Caribbean history, today we talk about fake news. Fake news is nothing new to us. No, seriously, because when you had the days of resistance, the revolution came about, rumor was a very powerful instrument to fight. The king says he gave us our freedom and you're denying us the freedom. So the revolution is going to start from the fact that you don't like that. I did some programs with the Peace Corps. And I went to this, there was a Peace Corps lady, comes to St. Lucia to do work with the children. And she said, I said that the St. Lucians don't like people to tell them what to do. Because we have this kind of ingrained resistance to authority. So the lady she said, Mr. Williams, what you said was true. I was doing a session with the children, and this little 5-year-old girl comes to me and say, who are you to tell me what to do? So the point is this kind of resistance to authority, whether you make it high grade or low grade. And so West Indians do not like people telling them what to do. So whether you have it authority or you make it soft and easy and so, there's this thing in our psyche or whatever it is that's going to give you a hard time, whatever strategy you want to take. Just a word of caution.
Okay, good morning. My name is Ria Yoching, and right now representing the Covella Foundation. So my question to the panel is the following. When we look at the scenario, let's build this up, we're appealing right now to the entire population. And let's bring this down to a human level, as you've been trying to pitch. Many of our regulations and so on go sort of B2B, G2B, and so on, trying to have a push mechanism towards our citizenry. This is a unique situation where we actually have to empower people, empower humans. And by extension, bubble that up to at a governmental level or at a business level to help set the frameworks to support it in an entire ecosystem. But there are tools. All of you, all companies represented at the panel have tools right now that are a mystery to many people. Families, housewives, mothers, myself included, teachers, students, those over the age of 13 and those under the age of 13 who are participating. I'll call it illegally, if you will, on the internet. How do we do a better job to begin at the awareness stage? So I do want to extend what Kevin was saying. What tools do you have at your disposal that we can avail ourselves of in the Caribbean? And how do we deepen our partnerships with you to be able to have a more fluid relationship to help support the incubation and spreading of those tools and understanding of the tools available to help in this fight against the negativity and then protect and incubate the positive aspects that we so want to protect.
So the tools that you have in the Caribbean are the same tools that all the people that use Google have worldwide, in terms of like flagging content, for example, in YouTube, but also, for example, for protecting your own data and accessing your own data in all across Google products. in case you're a Google account user. And I know that being able to put those tools into knowledge of our users has been one of the biggest challenges for us. So we are also trying to think on what is the best way to bring the word out, right? And to make users understand how they use it, how that they are available and how to use them. And I actually brought some leaflets on our privacy tools that at least could help start to bring that information into between you. But for example, we have a dedicated team that now is advocating for educating users, so developing trainings and online materials in English, but also in local languages, in Spanish, on how to empower the use of for example, data management tools or flagging or even filtering content on YouTube search, it's a tool for families to prevent kids from accessing content that they're not supposed to. So, I mean, the tools are out there, and we're always trying to think and discuss with local stakeholders on how to develop programs around them to educate people, and we're always open to that. I know that sometimes it's a matter of resources and hard to be everywhere at all time, and it's a matter of scale. So it's also we rely a lot on local stakeholders at achieving scale, like in ministries of education, NGOs, and civil society. We train them on these tools. We are hoping that they can then replicate that knowledge. But it's an ongoing work, and we're on top of that.
Well, I may not be the most popular company right now. I guess that's one of the reasons why we have a devoted person for the Caribbean now as well. We want to make sure that we create the right partnerships, that we speak to people, that we help train people, and that, as we do with everything else, we combine technology with human interaction. So we also work, for example, and I was very glad I was able to start the conversation about that in one of my meetings. But in terms of elections, right, we deploy in the platform a megaphone that says, today is a day to go and vote, right? And then there can be an information button where people, once they click, it redirects to the authority in that country who has the true information or where to go, what they need to do to participate. So it's a combination of tools, try to make as much as we can within the platform proactively for people, to empower people, and to get them to know more about us, and also do the trainings where we can explain that we do have some community standards. We have a parents portal, for example, and many people don't know about that. Once they start looking into it, they say, oh, that's great. I get all the advice that I need to guide my children on how to use the platform. So I guess it's a combination. It's a combination of tools, and also it's finding the right partners within the government and outside the government. NGOs that could help us, train kids on how to stay safe online, on how to combat bullying. It's such a wide spectrum that it's something that we cannot do on our own.
Maria Myers Hamilton from Jamaica, Spectrum Management Authority. Although I wear the hat of a regulator today, I'm going to wear a hat of an educator and a mother. And what came to mind when I heard Carlton speak is the whole matter of New Zealand and how that video went viral in such a short point in time. And I could never imagine the pain of persons who did not know what was going on when they actually saw this on social media. I think we have a responsibility, and I can think of in my country where young persons are now becoming immune to helping. So for example, a crime is taking place. A person would take out their phone and actually video it and stream it, rather than taking up their handbag, or I said, take off his shoe and slap the individual. Now, as a Caribbean people, we were engaging, we're loving, and all our children are our children. Social media is not intended to be a bad thing because the sharing of knowledge is critical for development. But I truly believe that we need to put regulations in place that will stop this type of behavior. Because as we know, we have to form behavior, and it's a social creature. We are the result of our experiences, our values, and our attitudes. So we now can't blame the technology. It's like I have a car. I could choose to drive that car into a crowd and kill somebody, yes, but I choose to drive on the road and maybe stop and pick up somebody who needs a lift. So it's not about the technology, but coining the behavior to make us more responsible. And that's my point I'd like to make today.
I think we had one over.
Yeah, I've been listening to the conversations over the past few days, and especially when it comes to regulation, I wonder whether we're not losing a little bit of the plot, in the sense that we seem to not be acknowledging the existence of governments, the role of governments, their responsibilities, their mandates. I understand your situation, brother, about wanting to make sure that you have all the options in terms of information. But when you look at what is happening with the need for regulation, it isn't always about some government attempting to censor you. It's a government actually pursuing its mandates, its responsibility to protect the society. Regulation is no doubt uncomfortable for the operators and for the intermediary firms and so on. There's a certain amount of discomfort that we must be prepared to endure in order to make sure that we can apply certain kinds of social rules. The very interesting thing I've seen around the world is that, I've worked for several governments, and I know what government objectives, the problems that government face in trying to achieve their objectives and how to do it. Sometimes governments themselves don't want regulations necessarily to be the way to go, because regulations by their nature tend to be specific, and life isn't. Life varies, situations develop all the time, and you will put a regulation in place and it will not fit when a new situation develops. Governments themselves have learned that, right? But there are situations in which you need regulations. Very interestingly, when you look at places like China, where the censorship is in fact either it's political in China, it's ideological or religious in the Middle East, for example, we don't seem to know how to deal with that. What we're dealing with here is not that. We don't have a whole lot of censorship that is ideology-based. We don't have a lot of censorship that is religion-based. We don't have a lot of censorship that is political-based. There are places in the world where that is happening, and we don't seem to know how to deal with that. We are just letting it happen. But in our environments, we're pretty good, actually. And we do have to have regulations to deal with some of those situations, as my friend has said.
Deirdre Williams, St. Lucia. I spent most of my life up to now being English teacher, so I'm very particular about vocabulary, and that's what my question is going to be. However, earlier, Facebook and Google both spoke about using human filters as well as technical filters. And I feel it's necessary to say here that I read an appalling article that was shared by somebody of the distress that those human beings are put to in the type of material that they are needing to deal with. And that's part of my point. Human beings are human, they are not tools. Sometimes I think we forget that. I was in an online meeting this morning that was talking about the human-centric nature of the internet, and that is the main principle we need to maintain, that it must be human-centric. You will find online from December 2003 a civil society declaration to the ITU about what we the people would like the internet to look at. And if you haven't read it, it's worth reading. So back to my question. You've used two terms. One of them is intermediary and the other one is community. If you are an intermediary, you are not a community. So which are you?
I think the difference between both concepts is that intermediaries are the platforms who allow users to create and access content. That was the definition of intermediary as the player who provides a medium through which users can connect, through which users can access content online. The idea of community, it's the users who use these platforms to create content, and in both cases, I think, well, YouTube, which is one of the services that Google provides, is that we rely on those communities to identify and detect content and flag content that might be in violation of our policies. I think that's the main difference of both concepts. So responding to your question, I think we are intermediaries who rely on the communities to provide a better services.
Maybe it's because of the hats I wear, but sometimes when I hear regulation, a chill goes up my spine. And I worry because certainly in the Caribbean, our participation in internet governance and also in the internet space is still in emerging phases. And while I understand that there's some things that need to be done, as Carlton said, when you look at some of the existing legislation, it's not only punitive, it's harsh. And and I'm not sure, as we go down this road, I think we need to look at all things. And we have to have that balance and common sense to make sure that, one, we have to satisfy the requirement that we in the region participate a lot further and a lot more in the internet space, and make sure that the regulation, if it needs to be done, is sensible and takes it into consideration.
Hi, yes. Just following up on what Carlton says, yes, we need to be very important. We need to, as Claudia was saying, well, this one is a point Claudia made really early, right? What is the overall objective? What are we trying to do? Are we trying to punish and be punitive? There's an incident right here in Trinidad and Tobago, where recently a leader of a political party was fined by the court for a case against another individual, a private citizen. And it was done through an internet-mediated platform. It's done through Facebook. And it's the perfect example where real-world laws were applicable and can address this. Where there was a difference or an adjustment was in the actual sanction. The weight of the fine had to take into consideration the repercussions of having that type of activity on Facebook. But real world laws are there and they exist, and maybe it's not a question of reinventing the wheel, but understanding the context that we have. When the laws created, they didn't have internet, we didn't have social media usage. So there needs to be that measured approach as to how we do this, because quite often we say regulate, we put social media in that bracket, and we lock off ourselves from potential to be innovative, to be productive, because we haven't understood the objective of what we're trying to do.
Nigel Casmi, just kind of adding on what Kevin says, I'll say something obvious as the challenge I have in my own mind. This is how I frame the problem. What we're trying to do is overlay a global network on a base of individual sovereign nations. Right? So is that a problem that is solvable? To what extent can we solve that problem? We're talking about global internet and we want to be as open as possible and so on. But the fact is, it sits on top of a system of countries which have a lot of different standards in them. And how do we find a way around that problem? And I think it's a good challenge to stimulate our brains.
Yeah, and probably adding to what you're saying is something that adds to the challenge is the fact that, as you were saying, some countries actually advocate for freedom of expression, others don't. So, yeah.
Okay, this has been wonderful, but I would like to keep us to time. So in the interest of, we are 5 minutes past where we were supposed to be. So I'll just ask every member of the panel to give us a quick wrap up, and then we'll be off to lunch. Thanks.
Just a few seconds based on what Nigel said. There is a thing called the internet and existing human rights. So we don't have time to go on all of them right now. So basically what we are doing in real life, let's say the offline world, and if you compare it with the online world, still we have some, let's say, guidance that are applicable also in the online world. So we can use that as a point of departure to address your question. I just would like to just read what I said again as my last comment. Instead of, because we have been focusing a bit on governments, instead of trying to defend society from the internet, a technology that benefits all humanity and to close off its potential in an attempt to stop terrorists, governments should use the internet to build community strength and resilience, to empower citizens to protect their communications and to promote solidarity. That's exactly what a friend from Jamaica said a while ago. We should not let terrorists sway how we use the internet.
I would only just to reinforce the message that this is not a discussion about not regulating versus regulating, but it's a discussion of putting forward smart regulation. Regulation that strikes the right balance between addressing the challenges and the harms that exist there, but without hampering freedom of expression or innovation, which are two great things that the internet has brought to us. So striking the right balance would be a summary of all my intervention.
I'm probably going to repeat something that that our founder and CEO said during our earnings call, and is, if we were going to invent the internet today, would you want just big companies like us defining what should be done? And the answer is no. No, we shouldn't be. Having said that, we accept the responsibility and the fiduciary duty we have with our users. And that's why we're open to the conversation. And going back to my opening statement, it is the beginning of the conversation. How do we update those rules in a way that we do not suppress freedom of expression, that we do not undermine innovation and productivity? It is a balance, as all of us have said. So we're here, and we're here to contribute as much as we can. So feel free to reach out to us whenever you're thinking of new projects, and we'll be glad to contribute as much as we can.
Thank you very much to everyone. And if Nigel has any housekeeping before we go to lunch.
Yeah, just that lunch is next door, right here in the Sapphire Room. And our schedule calls for us to be 1:30, so I'll ask that we try to make it back here at that time. Thank you.